Hi Class 4, it is story time again. So we're going to carry on with chapter 2 of Stig of the Dump. Barney's jeans were white with chalk dust and his hair and nails were full of it. He suddenly wondered what his grandmother would say. Then he suddenly wondered what time it was. In spite of the apples, his tummy was telling him it might be lunchtime. "You haven't got a clothes brush, have you, Stig?" he asked. Stig looked blank, and Barney decided that he probably hadn't. His eye fell on Stig's water pipe. Somebody had thrown away a vacuum cleaner, so there must be one of the brush things somewhere. Sure enough, he spied one, fixed a sort of a T-piece on the end of a long thin pole that was helping to hold the roof up. He thought the roof might hold itself up for a bit while he got the worst of the chalk dust off with the vacuum cleaner end, and it did. Stig was watching with a puzzled look, wondering why Barney should be pulling down part of his roof to brush at his clothes with. "You're lucky, Stig," said Barney. "Nobody asked you how you got in such a mess. I've got to go now. Must be nearly lunchtime. Pity I can't ask you to lunch. But really," he thought, nobody else even believes in him yet. "I'll be back this afternoon," Barney said from the door. Thanks for letting me help you. Goodbye." Grandmother and Lou were late getting back from town, so he had time to get the chalk out of his nails and hair and to look fairly respectable for lunch. They were too full of talk about how they had spent their morning to question him about where he had been. Over the stewed apples, he was able to say quietly, "Granny, have you got any things you don't want?" "Things I don't want, dear," Grandmother repeated. "What sort of things? Chilblains? Grandchildren?" "No, Granny. I mean things like windows and chimneys." Grandmother thought about this for a moment and then said that really she couldn't think of anything like windows and chimneys, except windows and chimneys, and she thought the house had only just enough of these to go around. And Lou just laughed and said, "Really, Barney?" Then Grandmother said it did remind her that there were some tins and jam jars she had meant to put out for the dustbin man, and perhaps Barney would be a dear and carry them to the gate. There were more jam jars than Barney thought possible, and quite a lot of useful tins with sorts of lids. Barney looked at them. The dustbin man wouldn't say thank you for them, he thought. Why shouldn't Stig have them? He remembered a big wooden box which Grandfather had helped him fix wheels onto, so that he and Lou could use it as a cart. He searched round and found it among the firewood, but still with its 4 wheels more or less straight and the piece of rope on the front to pull it with. He loaded it with jam jars and tins and found it quite a weight when he set off across the paddock with it. He looked at Flash, the pony, as he struggled through a long clump of grass and called rather crossly, "You might come and help pull," instead of just standing there. But he knew that Flash took a lot of persuading to be caught for Lou to ride him, let alone for pulling carts. The pony just stood and watched, tossing his head now and then at the afternoon flies. By the time Barney got his load to the edge of the pit, he was quite tired. But there was still the problem of getting them down to the bottom, to Stig. He sat on the camel's neck tree trunk. The string was still there. It was the thick brown sort, and he thought it would be strong enough for a few jam jars. He called to Stig, and after a time, Stig came out backwards, like a badger with its bedding, dragging a load of chalk. "I've got some things for you, Stig," Barney called down the pit. He pulled up the string and took the end to the pile of jam jars. About 8 of them were packed in a cardboard box. It would take too long to pass them down one by one, so he tied the string round the box, took it carefully along the tree trunk, and started to lower it. This wasn't nearly as easy as the carrots. The box swung wildly, the string round it started slipping, the part he was holding tried to run through his fingers and burned his hands. He took a turn round the stump of the branch and let it run round that, hardly daring to look down and see what was happening. He hoped Stig wouldn't get a jam jar on his head. The box was hanging by one corner when it reached the ground, but instead of untying it, Stig disappeared into his den. "Hey, Stig, undo it," Barney called. "There's still more to come." Stig came out again, holding what was left of a large, broad-brimmed lady's straw hat, with ribbons to tie it under the chin. He untied the string from the box and tied it to the ribbons. It made quite a useful-looking cargo sling. "Jolly good idea, Stig," Barney shouted. Stig's got brains, he thought. After that, it was quite easy. He hauled up the hat, filled it with jam jars, lowered it down with the string running round the stump of the branch, waited for Stig to unload, hauled it up again, and so on. When he finished the jam jars, he started on the tins, which were much lighter. And when he had lowered all the tins, he looked at the trunk. How strong is string? He wondered. Could he send the truck down the same way? If he didn't, he would have to trundle it all the way around the top and along the bottom of the pit. He wound the string a few times round the branch stump, leaving enough loose to reach the truck on the cliff top. Humping himself along the tree trunk, tied the string to a wheel of the truck, moved back along the truck, and pulled the truck towards him by the string. The truck lurched over the edge of the cliff, swung wildly outwards onto the string, which ran out so fast that he couldn't stop it, until a tangle in the string made it stop with a jerk. The string broke, and the truck was falling through the air. Barney held on to the tree for dear life, with his face against the mossy bark, and shut his eyes. He felt weak and dizzy. At last, he allowed himself to look down. He couldn't see the truck at first. Then he saw that it had swung out to land in the branches of an elder tree, and was hanging there quite happily. "I've sent the truck down," he called to Stig. "It may come in useful." He was still feeling what his grandmother used to call hot and cold all over, but he carefully inched himself off the tree and onto firm ground, and set off round and down to the pit. A pity he couldn't let himself down on a rope, but no, he thought, he wouldn't try that just yet. His idea of sending the things down on the string had been a good one, though, he thought to himself as he walked through the copse. Another day, he'd have to find some more tins and jam jars to send down. He hoped Stig liked them. They would come in useful well, the things that always came in useful if he kept them long enough. By the time he got into the den, Stig had untangled the truck from the tree and was squatting looking at it, and at the tins and the jam jars. And then Barney wondered what they were going to do with them. We will see what they do with them tomorrow. See you later.